Are you a woman over 40 who feels anxious, depressed, or both? Do you feel overwhelmed by your roles as a wife, mother, adult daughter of aging parents? Is your job making you feel overworked and overstressed? And do you want to develop a plan that helps you to find long lasting stress relief? Well, if you said yes to any of these questions, you're definitely in the right place. Because on today's Stress Talk Live, I'm going to share what you need to know to create a powerful, long lasting plan to lower your stress. And we're going to get to it in just a moment. Hey, 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 how are you today? I want to welcome all of you ladies who are watching live today, as well as those of you who will be listening to the podcast and who are watching the replays that are on YouTube and Facebook. I'm Marcyline Bailey, and I am sharing what I've learned to help guide you as a woman over 40 to live your best life. I know what it feels like to be depressed, anxious, overwhelmed with my roles, overworked, and overstressed. I get it. I was like that until I transformed the way I saw myself and how I interacted with the world around me. And that's what I'm sharing with you, those strategies that I've learned. Well, today on Stress Talk, we're going to be sharing what exhausted women over 40 need to know to create a powerful plan to lower their stress. And as usual, I want to just go over a few things with you, a few reminders. Please follow me on ML Bailey Consultants on Instagram as well as on Facebook. You will also find me at ML Bailey Consultants on YouTube. Not only that, I have a new link that I'd like for you to go to. This is my landing page that has all of my important vital links for you. So I want you to check that out. Write it down, take a picture, get it so that you can go directly there and get all the good stuff that I have for you. Also, although I'm working on a redo of my website, I have a fabulous web designer. LaShonda Henry is working on my website redo. In a little bit, you'll be able to go to see the redesigned, new and improved website at mlbaileyconsultants.com, where you will find a lot of my resources that I've made especially for you. So let's get started with what we're talking about today. If you're leaving a comment, please make sure that you've given Facebook permission to use your name and your image so that we can acknowledge you properly. I'm just going to take a sip of tea if you don't mind. You're wondering what it is today? It's actually rooibos chai, and it's very smooth. It has cinnamon, cardamom, turmeric, rooibos tea leaves. It's really good. Okay, so you don't want to hear about my tea. Let's talk about the plan. One of the things that we need to know, I always start when I'm working with women and clients, I always start at the beginning. We want to start at the beginning. And the beginning is where you are. We don't try to move you to a place so that it's convenient for us or for me. We want to start where you are. And in order to know where that starting point is, we always do an assessment. And that assessment can come in different forms. But for our conversation today, I'm going to share some things that you need to know so that you will be able to do your own assessment. And I'm actually going to, that's one of the steps I'm going to share with you. I want you to do an assessment to really determine where you are as it relates to stress and stress in your life. So, we're going to get started, first of all, with some information that's going to be very key. When we talk about stress, we talk about three things. There are three things that we talk about. We talk about the categories of stress, we talk about the intensity, and we talk about the duration. This is very, very important for you to remember. We talk about category, we talk about intensity, and we talk about duration. Oftentimes, when we talk about how stressed we are or how much stress we're under, we're not really we're talking about what's happening with us right at that moment, right? We're not talking about how stress can affect us over time. So it is very important for us to not only look at the types of stress, it's important for us to look at the intensity of stress as well as the duration, how long it lasts. And so that's what we're going to focus on right now. And then before we end, I'm going to give you an assignment. That's something that I do with people I work with. I always give an assignment. I love assignments. So I'm going to give you an assignment. So let's get into our topic for today. And remember, we're talking about categories as well as intensity and duration. So we're going to start with the categories of stress. And when we talk about categories of stress, oftentimes we hear about four different types of categories. There's physical stress, there's psychological stress, there's psychosocial stress, and there's psychospiritual stress. And I'm going to share a little bit give you some ideas of what is contained in those categories. I'm also going to share with you how I categorize stress, okay? So, first, let's talk about physical stress. And physical stress is any stressor that impacts the body. So, that could be some type of trauma. When we're talking about trauma, we're talking about an injury, we're talking about surgery, we're talking about infection. So you might get flu is a virus, but let's say you had an infection. You cut your finger and you had an infection. Thank you for the heart. You had an infection in your finger. Well, you would go to the doctor to get an antibiotic or some treatment in order to clean the infection, right? To get rid of all the bacteria that's causing sickness in your finger. So when we think about physical stress, we always want to think about what affects our bodies. Also, I was outside just yesterday doing some work in the yard. And where I live, it has been extremely hot. I mean, extremely hot. But we got out early and we started working in the yard. I was trimming bushes, pulling weeds, vines. I can't stand vines. I'm pulling vines. And that caused me to be hot. I was tired. Physical exertion or labor is also considered physical trauma. I was tired. I was overheated. I couldn't seem to get enough water. So when you're thinking about stress, you also always have to think about the stress that the body goes under. Not only are we looking at physical, like trauma or physical activity, we also have to think about and consider the environment that we live in, air pollution. How clean is our air? How clean is our water that we ingest? Is there a lot of noise? Do we live near a factory or near an interstate where there is a lot of noise? All of that is considered physical stress because it affects the body. Not only that, and let me throw out a few other things, we can have dietary stress, which falls under physical. We may not get enough nutrients. We may have food allergies or food sensitivities, which will also affect how our body functions. And that puts the body under stress as well. Dehydration is a physical stressor. So anything that affects or impacts the body is considered a physical stress. And when we're thinking about stress or looking at stress or considering how we are dealing with stress, we do need to look at all aspects. And part of that is physical, our physical stress, physical body. Also, let's talk about psychological stress. So, psychological stress includes our emotions, it includes our thoughts. So, when we're thinking about emotions, it includes not only anger, um, sadness, it also includes resentments and fears, frustration. It includes grief when we're grieving a loss, no matter what that loss is, if it's a loss of a loved one or if it is a loss of something that was dear to us. When we're grieving, those are emotional stressors and it impacts our psyche, right? Cognitive stress, how we think, what we think about, what we ruminate about. So think about it as sometimes, if you're sitting in a meeting and the meeting has gone on and on and on, you might be feeling stressed because you're feeling information overload. You're getting too much information. But not only is it information overload, it could also be worry. Things that you think about over and over and over again. Ruminations. It could be guilt. It could be shame. These are things that cause us to ruminate or think about things that are hurtful or have been hurtful to us. Not only that, are you a perfectionist? Does everything have to be perfect? Are you someone who has to have everything in its place? And if it's not, it causes you heartache? That is a type of psychological stress. Not being in control, when you feel like things are out of control, that is also considered psychological stress. So I've shared with you examples of psychological stress, and I've shared with you examples of physical stress as well. So let's go on to psychosocial stress. With psychosocial stress, it talks about or it relates to our interactions, how we interact with those who are in our environment, our relationships, marriages, our relationships with our children, relationships with coworkers or employers. Feeling as if you are feeling supported or a lack of support. A lack of support would be a psychosocial stressor. Not having enough resources is also a stressor. Imagine not having what you need on a day-to-day basis in order to just survive. We're not talking about wants, we're talking about needs. That is a definite stressor. Losing your job, losing money in a transaction, having all of your savings depleted. Those of you who have gone through that know how much stress you've been under because of that. I have lost a job before, and I know how that feels. It is very stressful until you find something else. Those are all psychosocial stressors. Anything that deals with money, I'm going to take that back. Anything that deals with Maslow hierarchy of needs, where your basic needs are not being met, those are your psychosocial stressors. Okay, so we've talked about physical stressors, we've talked about psychological stressors, and we've talked about psychosocial stressors. And these are all categories of stress. Now, I want to share with you psychospiritual stress. And this is the stress that we experience when there is our values do not align with our actions, or our values do not align with our purpose or our meaning. It deals with our psychospiritual stressors, deal with values, meaning, and purpose. When we are busy, but we don't get joy out of it, when we're doing things, but there's very little joy. We don't feel satisfied. We don't have fulfillment in our lives. Those are psychospiritual stressors. It's basically what your core belief is and what your core values are, but there's a misalignment. They're not aligned with what you're doing, what you're saying, how you're acting or behaving. It's out of line. So those are some examples of psychospiritual stressors. So I've talked about 4 different types of stress: physical, psychological, psychosocial, and psychospiritual. Okay? Those are the categories that you want to keep in mind when you're doing your assessment. So let's talk about intensity. Okay? So intensity, stress is, we experience stress in differing intensities. First, there is very little. We may not have very much stress. We may experience very little stress. And we know that because we lack motivation, we're bored, or we just might be in a state of calm. We're chill. Okay? And I like it when I'm chill. It's like, hey, nothing's going on. I'm chill. I'm cool. When I'm bored, or when I am lethargic or have very little motivation, that is cause for concern. It's cause for concern where there's little motivation and we're bored. But if we're calm, that's good. So one level of intensity is very little to just too little. Another level of intensity is just right. Now, just right intensity of stress means that you have the motivation and the initiative to accomplish all that you need to accomplish, as well as all that you desire. This is when all cylinders are pumping. This is when you are being challenged, but you're not overstressed. It's not too much, but you have the resources as well as the energy, the motivation, and the initiative to do what is required for you to do. You can meet the challenges that you face on a daily basis. That's when you have this level of the level of intensity of stress is just right. Now, I know you're probably saying, what? I need stress to do that? Yes, we do need stress, but we need it to be in a certain place. We need it to be just right. If we have too little, we can't accomplish anything. And if we have too much, which is what I'm going to talk about in just a couple minutes, it's overwhelming. and it leads us to burnout. So I'm talking about intensity. We can have too little, we can have just right intensity, and I'm talking about the level of stress, and I'm going to talk about overwhelming stress. So, um, there is a curve called the Yerkes-Dodson curve, and it's like a bell curve. And this bell curve indicates the level of stress. When the bell curve is at its peak, that's when we are at our just right level of stress. Again, we have everything we need, all the resources we need to meet the challenges that we face on a daily basis. When the curve starts to tip, that is an indication that we have too much stress. And when we have too much stress, our functioning begins to decrease. It actually starts to go down when we are overstressed, when we are overwhelmed, when we have too much on our plates, when we have more than we can handle. What that means is that we do not have the resources to meet the challenges that we have on a daily basis. Now, many of you have heard me talk about candles and how candles burn out. As long as there's wax, a wick, and energy, a flame, the candle will continue to burn and give off light and a little bit of heat, very little. But as soon as the wick starts to burn down and the candle burns down, the wax burns down, it depletes the energy. That is my definition of burnout. We are completely depleted. We are not able to do anything. There's no more. We're done. We can't get up. We can't move. We have nothing left. That is burnout. And when you think about a candle burns out when all of its energy source is gone. So when we're at an overwhelmed level of stress, we still have stress. It's overwhelming, but our ability to meet our daily challenges has decreased. And if we get to burnout, we're not able to do anything. We just lie in bed. We have no motivation. We are depressed. We cannot move. We are exhausted physically, psychologically, psychosocially, as well as psychospiritually. We are depleted. So, we've talked about intensity. We've talked about the categories of stress. Now, we're going to talk about duration. Let's get to duration. Okay, so we can experience stress in a couple of different ways. It can be acute, meaning it's short, and it can be remedied once the stressor has been addressed. What would be an example of that? Let's say that you're at work. Let's say that you're home and your child comes in and says, Mom, I have to go to detention. Why do you have to go to detention? Well, because I yelled at the teacher. So you're going to be stressed because of that, I'm sure, because your child has not behaved in the way that you've trained them to behave. But as soon as that stressor is gone, as soon as you've talked to your child, you've talked to the teacher, your child has gone to detention, then it's over. That stress is gone. Same with a physical stress. We talked about having an infection. That's an acute. It's an acute. It can be acute, where it's short lasting. But once you have taken the antibiotics and received treatment, it's gone. So there's acute stress, and then there's chronic stress. Chronic stress remains in place for an extended period of time. Chronic stress is what causes us to experience physical illnesses. We are more susceptible to colds and flu and infection when we are experiencing chronic stress. Chronic stress also affects our body and makes us more, it makes us candidates for high blood pressure, heart disease, that's chronic. High cholesterol is stress affects our cholesterol levels, as well as diabetes. Stress affects um, our diabetes if you have diabetes. Okay, so stress. My phone. Look, my Bixby is talking to me and telling me I don't want to know that. He's starting to tell me about diabetes. At least I knew what it was. Okay. So, excuse me. So, we have to be very aware of the intensity or the duration of our stress levels. Now, excuse me. I often share with people that I work with my ideas of stress. There is um, the type of stress that's like sand gnats. And I call that the aggravating little things. And these are those things that happen during the day that cause you brief aggravation. Somebody cuts you off as you're driving. Somebody cuts in line while you're waiting to get checked out at the grocery store. Someone doesn't hold the door open for you. Those are aggravating little things. That is one category that I've put under duration because they're fleeting. They come and they go. They're fleeting. Then there's chronic long standing because imagine you're holding a stack of books in your hand, but although you're holding books, someone comes and continues to pile books on top of books on top of books on top of books. And you can't get rid of any books. What's going to happen? You're not going to have the resources to meet the challenge, and you're going to either drop the books or you're going to fall out, pass out. So that is another type of stress that continues. And what that is it just stressors continue to pile on. Your refrigerator dies. The freezer dies. You can't find one. You've lost all of your frozen foods that you were storing in your refrigerator and your freezer. It just piles on top of it. And then to add, you don't have the money to replace it. Okay. It's just on top of each other. Then there's other types of stress where it's immediate, it's acute, but it's intense. An example, you have an accident in your car. That's an intense level of stress. No one's hurt, or someone may be hurt. It's an intense level of stress, but as soon as it has been remedied, the stress level will go away. So those are how I define stress. And if you want to know more about that, just let me know. I actually have a resource that I share. It's called Stress is Personal. So if you're interested in seeing that, let me know and I'll direct you. So here we are. We're at the end, near the end. And I told you that I was going to have an assignment for you. And yes, I do. Yay! Assignment. Okay. So here's your assignment. As I said, I'd like for you to do an assessment. I want you to figure out where you are. Where are you currently related to stress in terms of categories, intensity, and duration? and just journal it. Just jot some notes down. You can get a journal if you like. I was going to hold up a journal, but I don't. Oh, here. You can get a journal if you like, and just start writing in it every day. Just a few paragraphs, or maybe not a few paragraphs, but one paragraph or a few lines, or just make bullet points just to keep track. I'd like for you to do it for about a week. That should give you some indication of the categories that are most prevalent in your life, the intensity of stress that you experience, thank you, as well as the duration. Ask yourself these questions. What creates increased stress in my life? What kinds of things it create increased stress? And it could be small things like the sand gnats or the aggravating little things, or it could be larger things. But just keep track of that. Also, answer the question, how do I react or respond to those stressors? How do you respond physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually? How do you respond? What's your go-to response? Often we respond or we react and we don't know that we've reacted, and then we regroup, which is great. But how do you react and or respond? And then third, what is the outcome for you? When you've reacted or when you've responded, what's the outcome? Is the outcome positive, or is the outcome negative for you? Start there. That's how you'll do your assessment. And as I said, do it over a week's time. You don't have to share this information with anybody, but it will give you data that you can look at. And from there, you can begin to develop a plan that works for you. Now, this is what I do. This is what I do. And I'm giving you the bare bones of the assessment that I do with people that I work with, women that I work with. But these are just very key questions that I ask. So, for those of you who've come in late, we're about to end. But I'm Marcyline Bailey of Stress Talk, and I share what I've learned to help guide you as a woman over 40 to live your best life. Now, I just took you through what exhausted women over 40 need to know to create a powerful plan to lower stress. We talked about the categories of stress, the intensity, what that means, as well as the duration, what that means as well. I also gave you an assignment to begin to assess where you currently are related to stress in your life. And if you hopped on late, you can always watch the replay on Facebook and YouTube at ML Bailey Consultants. I'm so glad that you joined me today. I look forward to spending some time with you next week. I'm Marcyline Bailey. As always, take good care.